Yeah, so EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I
Exactly.
can give you a bit of an overview of what it is and how it works. Just would that be
Yes,
helpful?
and before we do that, some of our listeners might, there might be entrepreneurs and leaders in organizations and so on, and they might think like, well, but trauma, isn't that like a big word? Maybe it applies only to war veterans or people who were victims of car accidents and so on. And what you just shared about your own personal experience already points to the fact that we all might carry certain kind of traces of overwhelming experiences like trauma, right? Because your experience from your childhood is such an experience. Could you talk a bit more about how can we think about trauma and to whom does it apply in a way before we move
Right,
then to
right. And I would say that the term trauma has been used way too much for things that really aren't trauma in the same sense, but what I will say is we can talk about large and small T traumas. I think that's helpful. So the large T traumas are the traumas that lead to the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're like the car accidents. They're like the assaults. They're like these overwhelming experiences that create a sense of I'm going to die. And so the kind of symptoms that come from these experiences are nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, anxiety, trouble sleeping, and they impact relationships down the line. And so those are the big T traumas. And EMDR has got so much research. It's one of the most researched therapies for PTSD, for these kind of big T traumas. But we also have these small T traumas. And the small T traumas are the kinds of experiences that we all have that impact our sense of self-efficacy. They impact who we are. So they can be humiliations. They can be shamings. They can be bullying. They can be, for our LGBT folks, Q folks, it can be the kind of harm you've gotten from people not being rejecting or not being loved or not being cared for. It can be just so many of these things that impact how you view yourself so that you're not living fully. And what we find with EMDR is what we call targeting, when we go in on the image, the emotion, the body sensations, and these beliefs that get set in at the time of the trauma. And then we add eye movements or other forms of bilateral stimulation. So let me say that in the early days of EMDR, it was all eye movements. That's why it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. We found that there's some people who cannot move their eyes back and forth because they have eye injuries, or they just cannot do it, or they get hypnotized, or they have seizures, or they just can't do it. We found that other forms of bilateral stimulation work just as well. And that can be tapping on either arm. It can be tapping on the sides of the legs. It can be auditory stimulation. So there's all kinds of forms of bilateral stimulation. I haven't used eye movements in well over 20 years.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Because nobody wanted to use it. When I was able to introduce other forms of bilateral stimulation, nobody wanted to do eye movements anymore.
Fascinating. So the eye movement, you already showed it several times. So it would be like moving the fingers slowly from one side to the other, and the patient.
So the eyes move from far right to far left, back and forth. And so as you're focusing on the trauma experience that's locked in the nervous system, the eyes are moving right, left, or you're tapping right, left, or you've got these little devices that buzz, that vibrate in the hands, or you have auditory stimulation that's making buzzing, beep, 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 where you can passively receive this. You don't have to be doing eye exercises, which I'll tell you, it's very hard. A lot of people cry very hard. And if they're crying, you have to keep their eyes moving through the tears. And it's very embarrassing to be looking at somebody crying and them saying, keep your eyes going. So you can close your eyes and passively receive the bilateral stimulation if you're holding these little buzzy things. Yeah.
And just one question. So bilateral stimulation really means that we kind of try to stimulate the two brain hemispheres.
Yes.
One after the other, so moving between the two brain hemispheres. And that, how does it work? What do we know about why this has such a powerful effect on the trauma resolution?
We don't really know. And this is what's interesting about it. We know it works because we have pre and post measurements, right?
Yes.
So we know it works. There are different theories and they're looking at different brain changes. So what they see is that Before EMDR, the right hemisphere is activated. After EMDR, both hemispheres and the frontal lobes are activated. So it's changing the brain. One of the theories is that it's like REM sleep, dream sleep, right? And when we're dreaming, our brain is rapidly processing information, right? And our eyes are moving very rapidly. So eyes are moving rapidly and we're processing information. So there's that model. And then there's another one that has to do with rhythm, and that cultures all over the world use drumming, dancing, and rhythm. And when a baby's upset, what do? You pat the baby, you rock the baby. So there's something inherently comforting about rhythm. And Bruce Perry, his theory was that when the baby is developing in utero, it's hearing the beat of the mother's heart. So comfort and rhythm gets hardwired into the developing nervous system as something that's comforting. So he said that what we do with EMDR is we activate the trauma response, the sympathetic nervous system, if you want, and then we pair it with a calming experience, which is the rhythm, and that it short circuits the trauma response. You can't have both of those at the same time. Now, that may be what's happening with the desensitization part of that, but that doesn't explain to me this rapid processing, because what happens with EMDR is you get this very rapid processing of information, thoughts, feelings, body sensations, new memories, all kinds of spiritual stuff happens with the bilateral stimulation that is not explained with just something that's calming the nervous system. So you get a calming, a kind of desensitization, but you also get a reprocessing with new information coming and this bigger perspective arriving. So, and the other thing I will say that they don't tell you in most trainings is that people experience altered states of consciousness, and that it opens people to all kinds of other things. Angelic beings may show up. After death communications happen. People who've had near-death experiences, their spirit or soul will come back in. There's just so many of these altered states. It seems to open a portal to other states of consciousness that are like lucid dreaming. I think EMDR in some cases is very much like lucid dreaming. It's like some of the psychedelic work. But what's happening with EMDR is you're in conscious waking state at the same time you're experiencing altered states. So you're having both of those things happening. So you're very controlled and you're having these powerful experiences. So what I will say is that cultures all over the planet for thousands of years have used drumming and dancing as a way of processing traumas. You know, in the indigenous people of the Americas, all have used rattling and drumming and dancing for warriors after war as a way of healing the traumas of this. And I've been hearing this for years from indigenous people. So, and everywhere you go across the planet, they go, oh yeah, we do that. In Africa, they obviously do that. So, but these technologies have been lost by colonization. You know, people have come in and said, oh, no, you need to do cognitive therapy. You know?
Or take drugs, medicine drugs, pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah, right. But your technologies that you know are invalid because they're old. Well, they're old, and actually some of them work pretty darn well. So anyway, that's a little bit about some of what might be going on here. I think there are multiple things that are going on.
And yes, I mean, of course, one reason why we invited you is that you're an expert in an altered state, the EMDR-based work. And of course, we do the darkness work and the psychedelic assisted work and breath work and so on. But EMDR is really a mind technology that I don't know much about. And so it's so great to hear from you how it works, and that the rhythm is so important there. And it connects very much to Tribe in our group. We have been talking a lot about Ian McGilchrist's work. And he talks a lot about this, the two brain hemispheres, and that there's an urgent need for some rebalancing or integration between the hemispheres, right? And what you just shared is that this hemispheric integration or reconnection that is possible under these states, bilateral stimulation, is what yields such a tremendous effect, right? Of processing, of release, and then of maybe memory reconsolidation as well afterwards, right? You process and then a new memory forms and you emerge as someone who has a different view of themselves or of the event that happened, right? Or events.
Yeah, I think very much so. I think EMDR is profoundly integrative. And I think this is what we're looking at. So trauma is stored on the right side of the brain and is left in fragmented form.
Yes.
And we don't have access to language when you're in from the traumatized experience, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
therapies that are language dependent are not integrating.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we find with EMDR, and Daniel Siegel is one who speaks a
Yes.
lot about this,
Yes.
is he says that what EMDR does is it does horizontal and vertical integration. So it integrates left and right hemispheres, base brain, midbrain, and frontal lobes.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
go like this and like this. So it's profoundly integrative. And pre-EMDR, the person doesn't have the narrative. They often don't. Everything's very fragmented. Broca's area has been shut down. After EMDR, they can tell you what happened. They have the language and they have the narrative. But prior, it's all fragmented. So this is where so many of the therapies that are language dependent, the cognitive therapies, even some of the somatic therapies that don't integrate all of the different parts of it are missing something.